Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Lindsay Carlisle, and I'm a PhD student concentrating in special education at the University of Virginia. On behalf of the CEC Teacher Education Division's Diversity Caucus, I want to thank you for tuning in for this next interview in our Video Spotlight series. We are so excited to have Dr. Stanley Trent here with us today. As an associate professor of education at the University of Virginia, Dr. Trent emulates praxis in teacher education as he infuses his expertise in critical race theory across his focal areas of interest, including multicultural teacher training in special education, the disproportionate placement and exclusion of culturally and linguistically diverse students in special education and gifted programs, and inclusive practices within urban school settings. Dr. Trent, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Lindsay. I'm excited to be with you.
So excited to have you. And we're going to jump right into this here. And to start us off, what are some of your goals as a teacher educator?
Well, I think my main goal is to prepare teachers to meet the needs of students from minoritized backgrounds and to help them to learn to teach them in a culturally responsive manner. And with me, I teach the very first course in the teacher education program, and it is called Introduction to the Teaching Program, Teacher Education Program. And so I have to really work with them to give them an understanding of teacher education that really isn't focused on methods. I deal with other issues and factors that they will not encounter in their regular program.
That's a really great point. I think so often we tend to immediately go to those instructional method pieces, and really there's so much more to this job. And I think that sort of brings me to this next question here of how does your pedagogical approach address issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion? And are there particular frameworks or teaching methods that you find to be powerful in addressing those issues?
Well, one of the things that I do is to really focus on the history of education and looking at it once again through a historical lens. For example, I try to help students to understand that there are patterns in history that really occur over and over again that gives us a lens into why students have been treated the way that they have been treated, and also to understand how these patterns have influenced the degree to which they have made progress in their educational programs. One of the things I deal with is critical race theory. And I did not do this initially, but what I discovered is that over the years that much of what I was teaching aligned with the tenets of critical race theory. So I found that it was easy to sort of incorporate the tenets into my teaching. I also talk a lot about the levels of oppression, and because students don't understand that there are levels of oppression that influence how students have been treated and continue to be treated in schools. So we deal with, for example, individual oppression, we deal with institutional oppression, and we deal with systemic oppression, so that students can understand that oppression is more than just an individual thing, right? And one of the things I do is to use case studies to show that. So, for example, in looking at some of the case studies that I use, students can see how one person might oppress another person, but also institutionally what a school might do that results in oppression of certain groups, and how what happens at the institutional level is influenced by societal oppression. So those are some of the things that I do. And so with the case studies, one of the biggest things that I do is to help students to move away from looking at students through a deficit lens. And one of the cases, for example, is a case that I use about a Native American student who's in school, and the teachers believe that he is they look at him through a deficit lens because much of what he has learned in his culture does not coincide with what is being taught in the school. So one of the things that we do is to show that the how he is learning at home does coincide with what is happening in school. So, for example, he considers the months of the year to be 13, right? Because that's how he learns it in his culture, which goes against a Eurocentric view that there are 12 months in a year. And when teachers don't understand this, they consider the student to be deficit, that the student is having problems in school because they don't understand that. So one of the things that I also do is to help students to learn to determine or discern the differences between assumptions and facts. So, for example, in another case study, I use of a student a Latina student who has been referred to special education, is when the case study, when the school had the child study team, they looked at this student and her family through a deficit lens. So one of the things that they were talking about is the fact that the student had lice, right? And so what they talked about is that the family was not clean. They talked about the fact that the family was not clean. And so one of the things that I do then is to talk about ringworms and other
like parasitic type of things.
Yeah, parasitic types of things that are also prevalent in Eurocentric culture. So I have a TV commercial that I found that focuses on Christmas time, and a wealthy white family, and the child is talking to his grandmother virtually, and he tells her that he cannot come to her house for Christmas because he has head lice. Mm. And then he goes to the back of the sofa and he rubs his head on the sofa, and he says, "I have thousands of these." And she says, "Oh, okay, no problem. You don't have to come." But it really helps them to understand that I hadn't thought about that. And maybe even I have had head lice, but I don't think about myself as being unclean. So in helping them to really look at things through that perspective takes them away from a deficit focus. So that's another thing that I try to do.
Yeah, and I think that makes a really good point about also, as teacher educators, learning to recognize our own positionality in this work. So often, we often see many white teacher educators that are out there too. And when we are teaching future teachers with our own Eurocentric, westernized normative culture, mindsets, so on and so forth, where it makes it difficult to help teachers recognize those different assumptions versus facts. So learning to sort of grapple with our own recognition of those things as well before we're even tackling them with pre-service teachers, I think is a great point that also came to light here in that response. So thank you for that.
I think another thing going along with that is talking about the funds of knowledge that students bring to the classroom that are ignored. We've talked about that. But when one of the things that I tell my colleagues is that you need to think about your funds of knowledge and what you bring to the situation, because if you have implicit biases and you're not willing to identify those and bring them to a conscious level, then how are you going to help students do that? So yeah, I think that's something in teacher education that we need to focus on.
Absolutely. And for our viewers out there, Dr. Trent had shared with me the first case study that he had mentioned in his response to this question, the one that was about the Native American student. And we will be sharing a link to that case study with all of you so that you can access that piece of literature and hopefully use that as a resource for your own classes of pre-service teachers. So we know that preparing teachers who are responsive to issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion can really be challenging. I'm wondering, what challenges have you faced and how have you overcome them?
I think one of the biggest things that teacher educators don't think about is that this work takes time. That for example, I've been in this work. I've been doing this work for close to 30 years, and I am still learning, how to help my students to understand the factors that they need to really work with as they are preparing to teach students from minoritized backgrounds. When I started teaching, and I was teaching the class exceptional learners in special education, I really did not include a lot of information about cultural diversity. And when that was the case, my teacher evaluations were among the highest in the school. In fact, my department chair told me, that you're right up there. You're at the top in terms of your teaching evaluations. And then as I continued to teach, I started to incorporate this content into that course. And my teacher evaluations plummeted. And so that was difficult, right? To really sit down and think about, okay, how can I address this issue? Because I know a lot of, when that happened to a lot of teacher educators, they just pull that information out of their syllabi. So I did not want to do that. So for me, I had to begin to study more. I had to begin to study teachers or teacher educators who were incorporating this content in their classes. I had to talk with people who were doing this work.
So the last thing that I wanted to ask was if you are currently reading any up and coming scholars, and if so, what do you find most compelling about their scholarship?
Okay, so right now I am looking at the work of LaRon Scott, who is really focusing on recruitment of students from culturally diverse backgrounds. And he's also focusing on the models and programs that he is developing that can be used to do this. And this is very much connected to the work that I do, because I believe that we do need more students from these backgrounds in classrooms to work with these students.
Absolutely. And that's a special shout out there for our one and only Dr. LaRon Scott from the Teacher Education Division. So thank you, Dr. Scott, for all that you do to support our organization as well as our students, both pre-service teacher students, as well as our students out in classrooms today. So those are the last of our questions that we have. And I just want to take a moment here to thank Dr. Trent yet again for being here with us today. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you and hearing about your perspectives on teacher education. I know me personally, I got the opportunity to take a course during my doctoral studies with Dr. Trent, and I learned so much that if I could go back and do it all over again and start as a classroom teacher after the knowledge that I had learned from his course, I feel like I would have been a far more effective educator simply by the experiences and the expertise and knowledge that he had imparted on me in the classroom. And so grateful for that every day. So thank you again, Dr. Trent.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure for me to talk with you.